Welcome. Let's bring the meeting to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Evans.
Present.
Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Here.
Mayor Millman.
Here.
Councilmember Bess Campbell.
Present.
Councilmember Arndt.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Here. All present. Can we rise for the flag salute, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I move to accept the agenda in order and content.
I'd like to make an amendment to the main motion. We received an email earlier today that consent item number 6, the critical areas designation, should be taken off and moved to another future meeting. Mr. Buchanan, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, I plan to do that at the time where we were going to accept the consent calendar. Both of these are items on consent.
First, do we have a second for Councilmember Bess Campbell's motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I would like to amend that motion then to also include the proclamation for the city of Woodinville recognizing Vaisakhi Sikh holiday.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to amend Councilmember Bess Campbell's motion to include a proclamation on recognizing the Sikh holiday. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. No special presentations. That brings us to our public comments. Okay, during public comments, when I call your name, please come to the microphone and state your name and whether you live in the city limits. First, I hope I got this, Amy Lewis?
Yes. In all candor, my request was going to be for number 6 to be pulled from the consent calendar, but it sounds like that's already been done. So, good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. Thank you for having me here. I might go ahead and just read my public comment anyways, just so you can kind of hear the reasons why I'm here on behalf of WM. We were going to ask that it be removed.
Please do.
Okay. My name is Amy Lewis, and I'm here from WM to ask that you pull item number 6, the first reading of ordinance number 784, updating the critical areas regulations from the consent calendar, and consider revisions that would protect the rights of pending applicants. As you know, WM owns and operates the Cascade Recycling Center in Woodinville. Our facility will suffer significant negative impacts if the ordinance is adopted as is, as our attorneys have previously noted in letters and public comment. As context, in 2023, nearly 2 years ago, WM applied for permits from the city to extend a roof canopy over an existing paved area on our property used for the collection and sorting of recycled materials. The roof canopy is proposed to protect this sorting area from rainfall and runoff. No other changes to the building are proposed, and all of the functions and operations will remain the same. However, 2 years after starting the application process, we have no date certain for when it will end. The recycling center is located in a non-shoreline critical aquifer recharge area near the Little Bear Creek. WM was required to file an application for designation of the property as an urban stream, which would reduce buffers for the property and allow us to construct the canopy addition. We first met with planning staff and received pre-application comments from the city on March 30th, 2022. By March 2023, we had submitted all required applications. Then in August 2024, the city staff provided what we thought would be the last set of comments, which we responded to by October 14th, 2024. 3 months later, On January 9th, 2025, the city issued new comments which required additional outside consultant and expert fieldwork and reports. WM submitted our response on February 18th, 2025. As of today, the only response we have received from the city is a note that the application reviews are taking 12 plus weeks to complete, which in our case would be May 18th. The proposed ordinance, which will eliminate the ability for WM to obtain the urban stream designation and introduce many other significant changes to the critical area regulations, would take effect on July 1st. This means the law could change dramatically before our permit is issued, and the new regulations significantly alter the method by which stream buffers will be calculated and will effectively eliminate our ability to install the canopy. So I came to you tonight with two requests. First was to pull the ordinance from the consent calendar, which has already been done, so thank you very much. And then second, we also would appreciate any assistance in expediting the processing of our application. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. That's your 3 minutes. And if you haven't already, can you forward that to city staff and city council possibly?
Sorry, my comments?
Yes.
Yes, I can write those. They're notes right now, but
Okay.
I can certainly make those a little more formal.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Allison Farmer. I neglected, and I apologize, we have 3 minutes for public comments.
Good evening. Alison Farmer, resident outside the city limits. I'm here to talk about the moratorium. Okay, I once took a course about how to get things done, and one of the biggest takeaways was if you can do it within the next 3 minutes, do it now. On January the 9th, 2024, this council had a discussion on policy guidance for updating the comprehensive plan. It included the new state mandate to provide housing for all income types. There was a policy question in front of you asking if you should mandate affordability. 6 of you said yes, affordability needed to be required. Councilmember Bess Campbell even mentioned enacting a moratorium until a policy was adopted to make sure the R4 Chateau property was captured into the new code. It just takes 3 minutes to ask for affordable housing to put on your work plan, yet nothing has happened to it all year. The comprehensive plan still does not mention adopting a mandate. I've been continually asking you to address the need of adopting an affordable housing policy. I spent chunks of time in the height of summer attending special meetings to fight Old Town, which got messy due to not having a policy. So any lack of time excuses will not satisfy my frustration. When a brief discussion finally happened last month, an affordable policy adoption was pushed yet further out with deadlines and a feasibility study. The prediction of Green Partners suddenly appearing to get a fast-track DA rang true. Why is tonight's discussion only suggesting a moratorium on multifamily housing permits? You've commissioned an affordable study that will look at the R1 to R4 as well. It's too late for the chateau, but lot dividing has been happening on the West Ridge, and I think the feasibility study will show it is worth including mandatory affordability citywide. It's vital any Green Partners DA is signed under our new code, and that they are prevented from going straight through planning in the meantime. All the scary bits in your staff report about how a moratorium could impact affordability and middle housing targets is questionable. There is no affordable housing due to appear in permitting at the moment, and none is going to be built in the next 6 months. I have not seen any affordable townhomes being built, so they need to be included. You will likely still be offering incentives for affordable, even with a mandate, so it's just a guarantee to get some and will not affect what is built. This has gone on long enough. Don't just discuss the idea of a moratorium tonight. Take 3 minutes at the end and enact one. This is an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Consent calendar.
I move to accept the consent calendar as earlier amended.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to our first business item number 7, discussion of moratorium on multifamily housing permits. Mr. Buchanan, Ganson or Grumbach?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I've got a presentation. I'll be assisted, obviously, by Mr. Grumbach and Mr. Ganson this evening. We can certainly answer questions as we go. Short presentation, and this is based on the topic that was raised at your last council meeting with specifically possibly enacting a moratorium on multifamily housing permits. So we just have some background research to supplement what's in your staff reports and hopefully answer any questions you might have about this evening. Background, as I mentioned, it was brought up at your last meeting on March 18th. The concern was around making sure that we had affordable housing provisions or inclusionary zoning in place before any big projects go through permitting. And City Council agreed at that meeting to place a discussion on a future agenda. So the authorizing RCWs for this type of endeavor would be RCW 36.70A.390. It authorizes local governments to adopt moratoriums or interim zoning controls. And those are similar but distinct. Moratorium is a temporary suspension of an activity or law until future consideration warrants lifting the suspension. In this case, that would be the suspension as proposed by council in the last discussion on the acceptance of permits for multifamily projects. And that was specifically what was discussed at that last meeting. Interim zoning controls, alternatively, are temporary zoning regulations while the local government revises its existing zoning ordinances. The city does have some experience with this in the last few years, and Robert can speak to that if necessary. They could include temporary inclusionary zoning controls applying to projects with permits submitted during the time the interim zoning controls were in effect. So much like a moratorium, these are for a defined period of time. They're interim zoning regulations while we work out the permanent regulations. Under this interim zoning controls, there would be no need to suspend acceptance of permit applications. But those interim zoning controls would apply to any applications that are submitted or received during the period of applicability. The process for either one of those is very similar. A public hearing and adoption of findings of fact is required either prior to or within 60 days after the adoption of such provisions. The ordinance would take effect, depending on a vote of the council, either immediately if approved on an emergency basis with at least 5 council members, or alternatively would take effect 5 days after publication if there were 4 members voting in the affirmative on that decision. Both of them are limited in duration to 6 months, but may be extended to 1 year with a work plan. And they may be renewed, as I mentioned, for at least that second 6-month period to get to the full year. That would require a subsequent hearing and findings of fact. All right, risk and recommendation. This is probably where Mr. Ganson can help out a little bit. I'll cover it just briefly, but there are legal risks of either option. Moratorium is probably the most disruptive to exercise of property rights and likely then more amenable to takings claims. The interim zoning requirements...
Mr. City Manager,
yep.
Can you explain in layman's terms what that means, takings claims, the moratorium?
I'll let our attorney do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, did you want me to jump in and do that now?
That would be appreciated, yes.
Sure. Yeah. So this is rooted in the U.S. Constitution. Fifth Amendment prohibits taking of property without just compensation. Federal courts have identified that can go beyond the actual permanent physical taking of someone's property and can cover regulations as well, regulation on the use of real property. And so in the right or I suppose wrong case, court could conclude that a regulation is so onerous that it constitutes either a temporary or a complete taking of that property, in which case the government owes compensation for the value of the taking. That test looks at the economic impact of the regulation on specific particular property owners, including whether it's diminished the value of the property. It looks at the extent to which the regulation interferes with an owner's actual, reasonable, and justifiable investment-backed expectations. So if they have spent significant money towards a development that they reasonably contemplated could happen, and that would achieve a particular value from their property, then that's a consideration. And the test also looks at the nature of the regulation at issue and sort of the public policy justification for it. Every one of those cases is subject to its own analysis, including looking at the particular properties impacted and whether there are investment-backed expectations that are frustrated or perhaps completely squashed by a regulation. Obviously, a moratorium is a complete stop on ability to develop the property, or at least within certain parameters, in this case dealing with multi-housing developments. And so those factors are going to look a lot at the length of the moratorium. Did the government unduly delay resolving the issue that supported imposition of a moratorium? They'll also look at the purpose of that moratorium. I think in today's climate, it's fairly well accepted that there is an affordable housing crisis. And so I don't think the city has much difficulty in justifying a moratorium or an interim regulation, but it still behooves the city to work as quickly as possible upon adopting that sort of measure so that you reduce the temporal impact of the regulation on property owners. And that's most important in the case of a moratorium because, again, that shuts down whole categories of development, whereas an interim regulation such as the one that we'd be talking about tonight with inclusionary zoning that imposes conditions on development but doesn't preclude it, that's a significantly lesser impact economically on the property. It's not zero impact. It also has some justification in public policy. And so, as the presentation suggests, that's somewhat less legally risky than a moratorium. But I also don't want to send the message that a moratorium is an inherently dangerous thing to undertake. Cities throughout Washington do them fairly frequently. And as long as you have a plan to do the work that needs to be done to resolve the issue and then open back up to development with whatever new regulations you've adopted, you'll be in a pretty good spot. But on balance, between completely shutting down categories of development or adding new temporary conditions to them while you continue to work the policy problem, the latter is certainly less risky from a legal standpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ganson. That was verbatim what I was going to say on that. So Mr. Ganson covered the majority of the bullet points here. I'll just add the consideration here, just things for the council to consider. The recommendation with the interim zoning regulations for the reasons Mr. Ganson mentioned, but also some others. It would allow the development of traditionally more affordable housing types, which are traditionally stacked units, multifamily units, to continue, albeit with new interim regulations in place to require affordable components there, rather than shutting down that category of development wholeheartedly. It still allows the mandate to realize affordable housing at some level while more extensive program is analyzed. Depending on what that interim regulation looks like, there could be requirements or mandates that new development is allowed to continue, but with X amount of affordable units, for example, required as part of that approval.
Councilmember Best-Campbell has a question.
So with these interim zoning that we would have to come up with, we would have to then come up with it. So we would be doing affordable housing zoning twice. So first we would guess, and then second we would get the full feasibility analysis, which up there says by fall. So how would we make the estimation on the interim for what the affordability should be and where? If we don't have the analysis, which we're waiting for it, it seems like we're just going to be throwing darts at a board and hoping we hit something. So how do you go about coming up, it sounds from the presentation, that's what staff is pushing here, is the interim zoning regulation. How do we identify the interim zoning regulations if we don't have the data to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I can answer a little bit on that. So essentially what you would be looking at the end term is that you're not going to dive as deep into the regulation, so you're probably going to be, like, for example, and you got some questions coming up in here that kind of try to start narrowing this down a little bit, but we would need to get an idea of where the council sits just in general as far as what the policy might look like, and we would just set some parameters around that. But it wouldn't necessarily be an in-depth or full look at what the full regulations, because that's what the report's necessary. We'd want to make sure in advising you that as you, whatever direction you go with an interim, that it doesn't in its own right create a situation where you're stopping projects from moving forward, but it wouldn't necessarily be as fully developed. Like, for example, we may not require incentives with this interim, but when you finally fully develop the full regulations, based on the report we get on it, you may want to add incentives in there to help offset some of the costs and stuff like that. So what you would do is just essentially the interim is just kind of a high level, establishing some parameters to take a look at right now. And then once we get the study back, we'll dive into more details and work out the more specifics with that. Because that's what's going to take the time, is actually diving into the details of the whole entire program. That makes sense?
Okay. As the council member mentioned, obviously this could take, either one of these could take place, could fill that gap while we are going through this, the ongoing effort for inclusionary zoning feasibility analysis. We're just starting that work now. We anticipate that work will be complete by the fall. And that's the analysis, as discussed, that looks at the economics, not at a regional level, but at the hyper-local level of what can we realistically demand that is feasible on both sides of the party there. So that's going to take a little bit of time to go through that. We're going through the consultant selection process at this point. All right, and these ones certainly, Mr. Grumbach and I can...
Councilmember Taylor has a question.
Yeah. When we're talking about affordability, are we talking only rentals, or are we talking about low-cost affordable housing options, condos? Because I'm kind of I'm getting a lot of input that we have too many rentals in the town and they're not affordable because they index up, and the people that are in them have difficulty meeting that rent. It's much better to own, fix that price, and have that guarantee that for 30 years this is what your mortgage is going to be. It doesn't go up and down or index, or doesn't go up with the economy. And that's what we need, I think. And we need to be looking at affordability being some ownership in the mix, because right now we are way too far swung over to the rental. And even if we talk about affordable rentals, if they go up 10% a year, or they go up, sooner or later, somebody on fixed income is not going to be able to meet that affordability level. So,
yeah, to answer your question, Councilmember, it can be both, certainly, right?
Are we looking at both?
Well, we haven't drafted anything yet. That's part of the discussion this evening, is need to hear from council on what the interest is there. But I would certainly think that both would probably be applicable here. If your MFT ordinance is a great example where that covers, there's provisions for either scenario, ownership or rentals there. So it's entirely up to council.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So some questions. So that's the recommendation from us, was to focus more on the interim zoning regulations for the reasons we outline there. In either case, there's some questions, whether it's, well, moratorium, there's less questions. There are zoning regulations. In either case, we'd come back to council with the operative ordinance there. For the interim regulations, if that's where council does deem necessary to go, we have some questions to work through just a conversation with council on this. What does this ordinance apply to? Is it just, as council mentioned the last one, multifamily, and in that sense, is it just the traditional attached and stacked, or are we thinking more broad definition of multifamily, townhomes, duplexes, multiplexes, et cetera? Another one, if moratorium, does the ordinance not include accepting all permit applications associated with these projects, or just building permits and maybe land divisions? There's some questions around vesting there and when that happens. There's obviously, all the council's familiar, there's a lot of work that happens before those building permits come in, and those are the ones that typically vest the project. So there's some considerations there. Should the ordinance apply to just the central business district zone, where we have seen those multifamily units predominantly, or should other zones be included? zones that allow multifamily dwellings in the broader sense of the R8 through the R48, as well as the CBD and TB zones. And then if interim zoning controls are the preference for council, should the ordinance include a unit threshold for applying the requirements? And we've talked about examples of those from other jurisdictions over the last year as well. So just some questions to help facilitate discussion and give some direction to staff. I'll come back to this one in just a second. That the end result for this evening, there's no action that we're recommending, but this would be a discussion and providing direction to staff to come back with a implementing ordinance at some point.
Questions for staff? I have a couple. So when we're talking about a multifamily, does that definition include townhomes as well as, I mean, obviously it includes stacked units, but does that include townhomes?
So that was one of the questions up there. The zoning definition of multifamily is the attached and stacked, so it's kind of like what you see a lot of these bigger projects and stuff here. But some places use the term multifamily, they include like townhouses and stuff because it's multiple units all connected to each other. So that's one of the reasons asking for that clarification on that. Zoning code is attached and stacked. If that's what you want to limit it to, that's how we would put this together. But if the council wants to have this a little bit more expansive than that, then that's how we would write this up.
Maybe this is a question for Jared, but where is the legislation on the relaxing the condo liability laws at this point?
Yeah, so both of the condo liability laws are continuing to progress, and at this point they have I haven't included in my update, but they have their next hearing coming up at the end of this week.
Has that been pretty, has the votes passed pretty narrowly, or have they been passing?
So far it would appear that both won't have a problem passing.
Okay, so that's one of the problems we've had, and every city has had, is the condo liability laws, which it looks like Olympia hopefully is going to relax those. I would encourage us to include all multifamily, and that should include townhomes. And I agree with Councilmember Taylor that we should encourage where we can and where it makes sense ownership opportunities. However, construction being what it is, that can be a challenge for affordability. So you got to come up with a down payment, and you have to, you're still going to have rent, and it's not a fixed rate. You have insurance that fluctuates, taxes that fluctuate. So that isn't the panacea for everything. But I do agree that we should encourage ownership where we can. So I'd like to see us include townhomes in that mix. And my other question is, right now, do we anticipate any projects over 10 units? Is there anything in the pipeline? Do we anticipate anything more than 10 units coming in the next 6 months?
Well, we have projects in the pipeline because there's already permits out on them, but as far as any new projects over 10 units, there is nothing currently been proposed. You do have discussions about the Green Partners project, but they're still in the very early stages. Building permits for that aren't going to be here probably for quite a while still. So,
do you have a ballpark on when we might expect Green Partners to come back with a new plan?
Well, the development agreement is the first phase, which that could potentially have vesting in it, but you also have an ability to put more strict standards out of the development agreement anyway. And I think we would anticipate something back on that in the next month or two, hopefully.
Okay. I'd like to see us do the interim zoning and have that include the CBD and the EMU or GB or whatever we're calling it at the moment. And I would like us to start a minimum of 10% affordable required over the next 6 months.
I should clarify, there is no EMU currently.
That's why I said EMU or GB or what.
Yeah, we don't have housing allowed in the GB zone. So in that area, that's part of our part of our future work that we're trying to get to the council as part of our comp plan updates. But that's a little bit down the road. So CBD is where we allow most of our multifamily. Those other ones are, but that's where most of our development capacity is in the CBD. But the EMU zone doesn't even exist yet.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Yeah, I have to kind of lean in on this as well and say that I am definitely not for a moratorium, less because of not wanting affordable housing, but more because of the chilling effect that it would have. I was actually sent a message a little earlier today about something that we could do in order to replace having a moratorium, something that staff could help us out with that would be less onerous, largely because in 6 months, that's a very long time. And I noticed that in this presentation, it says that we will not be ready with inclusionary zoning until fall, and fall is not a definitive date. So we don't know what, I don't think anybody in this audience could tell me what housing supplies cost right now. And with all the random looming tariffs that are coming down the road, I imagine no one could tell me what it would look like in 6 months. And I would hate to implement something that would put us in a position. But the plan that's being put forth, or the thing that staff is leaning towards, does seem to have what we need in order to prevent anybody, as we talked about in previous meeting, getting under the radar or adding multifamily housing without it being considered or without it having any level of affordability added.
Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. I would also lean towards an interim zoning regulation rather than a moratorium for exactly that chilling effect that it would have on development, which would in turn cause any housing being pushed off to have an increased price, which would kind of work against our ultimate goal of affordability. For my view, we should keep any interim regulation fairly simple and straightforward, because this is a very nuanced subject. And this week I was just reading a few reports that have come out recently from Seattle's housing market on the effects of their mandatory affordability and where it has shown benefit and where it has actually inhibited townhome building as well as affordable units in certain parts of the city. And it is very much a hyper-local, as you said, Mr. City Manager, a hyper-local issue. So I think that a regulation that's just 10% of multifamily, something that we know developers can take advantage of our MFTE program, which will help offset the cost, would just be a simple measure that would help capture any potential projects that come up before we can get that really informed view of what we want in the city. Our ultimate goal is to have more affordable housing. So I think a small step that would prevent us from missing an opportunity with a simple regulation that would just hold us over until we can have a really informed discussion would be my preferred option.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you. I have a question. Why are we not taking a look at non-multifamily? Like, why aren't we looking at developments of 10 units or more?
That was from the council's discussion at the previous meeting. Multifamily was specifically mentioned, but certainly if council wants to have it more expansive than that, they certainly could include that.
Yeah, because I think the whole thing that kicked this off was the potential for Chateau Saint-Michel to go put in a whole bunch of houses, giant McMansions, right, and not contribute at all to our affordability in any way, shape, or form with money or land or units.
St. Michel may already be too late because they have a subdivision application and that does vesting on it. So I'm not sure even these interim are necessarily going to be able to be applied to St. Michel's.
Okay, so there's nothing that we could really do to slow that one down.
Not slow the project down, which I don't think we'd want to anyway, but I'd have to talk with the city attorney a little bit more in depth about, but generally when you have a subdivision application in, it's usually what you have disclosed as being part of that application is what the zoning regulations usually are going to be that apply to it. So they've indicated they're going to build single-family houses in the project, and so that would be essentially what we would be thinking about, at least at this point, that their vesting would be included on. Whether you could add this on there, I'd have to defer to the city attorney on that, but there could be some challenges with that.
Okay. So I also support interim zoning controls. I think it's a more thoughtful and focused approach that's going to allow us to temporarily pause development that doesn't align, but it's not going to freeze or halt all of the investments in Woodinville that we want to encourage. During this, though, I would also like us to take a look at a couple things. Number one, at bringing the community in, having more of these community engagement sessions, and really take a look at programs like what Renton has, where they have the ability to fast track solutions like ADUs. They have 5 or 6 permit-ready ADU plans ready to go. Anybody can come in off the street and they can get that permit and they can get going. This has been a proven way to help offset affordability crisis. It makes it really easy. They even have a list, and not approved, but a list of builders who have an interest in this kind of program and who have the ability to do it, who've proven that they can do it. And I think that it's really important that we look at things like this as well, especially since that's already allowed in much of the city. And I'd also just really like to take a look at if we could get an actual date when we think we're going to have it. The fall is a really long time. I would like to know, are we talking September? Are we talking October? Are we talking November? And so, maybe not tonight, but I would really like to know when that is, because that is pressure that we're getting of why can't you move faster?
Yeah, so the target date would hopefully to have the EMU and all this other pieces of the puzzle would be complete, would be by the end of this year. Of course, that depends if other priorities end up suddenly getting in front of us, because we can only handle so much in the workload. Right now, though, we have a priority. It's a little bit in front of this, which is the middle housing provisions. We need to get those by June, or we're going to have state model ordinance that's going to be imposed on us, which we don't want. So that's the only reason why that's got a higher priority at the moment, or why we're suggesting a higher priority, because we don't want to have to follow what the state has put in their model ordinance. So we need to get that done first, and then we'll be able to really start ramping up the work on the rest of this with the EMU, the inclusionary zoning, and the rest of the stuff that we need to help implement our comp plan. And ideally, we want to try to complete that before the end of this year.
Thank you.
Councilmember Best Campbell.
So how long do you think it would take to get the interim housing numbers? So we talked about fall for the major report. We've got this looming deadline in June for middle housing. How would we shoehorn all of that in, and what's the time frame for interim zoning versus a moratorium? Are we saving a lot of time on that?
You mean if we were to adopt the interim?
How long would it take to get the interim numbers before we then got the numbers in the fall? So how long would it take staff to come back with numbers for that interim?
Well, for the interim, it's the council, like if we follow the direction you gave us about the 10% and keeping it simple, we can have that as soon as the council wants to take action on it. If the council wants to get into more details on the interim, then it would take longer. But if we keep it pretty simple, then it's possible to have one, I think.
Yeah, I think if we kept it simple and give us time for the public hearing that's required, we're probably looking at that first meeting in May, which is the 6th.
And then I had a question for you about MFTE numbers. So our MFTE is it 10% at 65 or 10% at 50 for 10 years? Anyways, thinking about the MFTE numbers, do we want the interim zoning to immediately trigger that MFTE? Or do we want 80% affordability across the area, or do we want to say, yes, we want everybody to trigger MFTE, but by triggering MFTE, that means we're not going to get the property tax revenue on it. So that, I think, is a conversation we should have. If we say we want MFTE to trigger, that's a decade, 8 to 12 years of not getting that revenue. So I really think we need to think about how this relates to MFTE. I think using 10 units is a good start. If you're building a duplex and saying one of them has to be affordable, I think that's harder to implement. My main concern, and frankly, either one of these works for what we're looking for. I don't want to come up with a really low-ball number for interim zoning and finding a lot of developers taking advantage of this low estimate number that we have when we come back and see an analysis that says we actually could get a lot more. So I think we need to be yes, it should be easy, but I don't think it should be an intentional lowball number either. I think that most developers come out for permits in the fall. If we wait until fall, I don't see that as a major hindrance. But this interim zoning, I do think we need to take a little bit of consideration as to how it relates to MFTE and whether we want to trigger it entirely or we want to set it at levels that won't necessarily trigger MFTE, but there needs to be, I think, more conversation over that because it's not just affordability, it's also long-term sustainability of the project and the city's ability to maintain all of the infrastructure around it. So either one of these, really, the only thing that concerns me is that interim zoning is too lax.
So something I can mention about the MFTE program. So the MFTE program is not an automatic trigger. I mean, there are qualifications for it, but MFTE requires a council action in order to qualify for it. So typically we've done them through the development agreements, but if a project came in that did not have a development agreement and they did the things that would be required, they would still need council to approve that MFTE program. So there is a step in between here if council has concerns about that. The MFT is just not an automatic thing. It's something that the council has to approve in a separate action from everything else. So the council does have a chance to look through that part of it.
I guess that's one of the considerations is, do we want those programs to come in front of us? So do we want to set an affordability level that if a developer does want to hit the MFTE level, do we want to then encourage them to come to us and ask for a development agreement or ask for something something to help make it more affordable for them to build? I just think that there needs to be a little bit, I'd like personally at least a little bit more information on how we can make those work in synergy, how we can make sure that we're getting a good interim zoning as opposed to just saying this number seems good enough. Because my concern is that we're going to have developers who immediately rush in and get all their permits written, and we're going to lose out on affordability for want of a couple of months. And this is the downtown for Woodinville for years to come. I want to make sure that 50 years of affordability is 50 years of as much as we can possibly get. So I look forward to seeing how you thread that needle. It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I mean, we do have some examples of, like, for example, the city of Redmond uses 10% and they have incentives and stuff, and they've been actually they've built more housing on the east side than any other city, including Bellevue, over the last 5 years. And that's what these requirements and stuff they've had in there. On the other hand, we kind of talked about this at the last meeting. Bothell has a mandatory requirement. They don't have any incentives and nothing's happened under it. So we do have some examples out there that we can at least use to help set this initial interim, and then the study can help us actually understand things in a lot more detail.
I'll add to that. I think they're the right answer, and you need to give, I mean, if this is council's direction on it, give us a little bit of time to think through this and the nuances, as you point out, council member. I think the right mix is probably somewhere in between those two examples that Mr. Grumbach mentioned. We know the MFTE provides our program, we know that provides offsets to the cost of providing that affordable housing that are palatable for developers versus. And we have the example of Bothell, where if we just go straight without any offsets, it doesn't create anything. On the other hand, being interim regulations, I'd be at least initially hesitant to come back with a recommendation that says, they can have this, but you guys have got to give up density and height and everything else, because that's a much bigger conversation that needs to be part of the permanent discussion, permanent regulations, not the interim. So to me, the MFTE provides a pretty good interim solution, but that's something we need to think through a little bit before we bring our recommendation back to you guys.
Councilmember Arndt.
I would agree that I think the MFTE program is a down and dirty offset to the cost of providing affordability, but I think that there is room, even in a simple interim regulation, to include the option for developers to not use the MFTE. I don't think it needs to be required that they use the MFTE program, but that they can use it to offset that cost. So I would be supportive of something, for example, like 80% AMI required on 10% of the units, or they can use the MFTE program to get deeper affordability and then have an offset to that cost.
And again, just to clarify, the MFTE is always a voluntary program, and then up to the council to decide whether a developer can use it or not.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
And I think you, Mr. Grunbaugh, and you, Mr. City Manager, were already touching on this. Do we foresee anybody actually giving 10% affordability without the MFTE? And why would they do that?
That's unclear. Until we've done the analysis, it's unclear at this point.
Okay, so this will be part of our inclusionary discussion. All right, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, staff? I have a couple. So the 10 units, for example, 10 units would be one if we did the 10% on whatever project. And traditionally, we've used Arch to manage, well, not traditionally, but what we're going towards is Arch to manage that affordable to do the administration of the MFTE program. What would one unit, if we put that requirement in there, what would the administration of that look like? Because I've been told that Arch doesn't manage that small of a project or number.
And just clarify, it wouldn't be MFTE you're talking about. You're actually just talking about the inclusionary zoning piece, correct? Because they don't manage the MFTE program. They can help us implement it, but they don't manage that part of it. That would be a question we'd have to check in with Arch if they have a minimum number. I'm not really clear if they would have a problem with one or not. They did, like with this project just down the street here, over at the former Woodgate there, the Main Street project, they do have like model covenants and provisions on how to handle that. And so they don't necessarily specify a specific number in there. I think they probably would prefer bigger projects, but we'd have to ask them if they would be able to do something as small as one.
Okay, so I like the direction that Councilmember Arndt was going. I think the 10% mandatory, and then if we want to give further incentives where it makes sense, I think that makes sense to me. And then that would, I don't know the time, but fall, we're early April, so we're into October for that 6 month. Well, when you come back to us with it, so, well, you come back to us in May, so then we're in November, so somewhere in there it's officially actually winter. So I think 6 months having the inclusionary, because it doesn't make sense to me to have a moratorium to halt all building in order to get affordable housing. Makes no sense to me. That doesn't make any sense at all. So we have to, and we have a lot of more, according to our attorney, a lot more liability to the city and going to some moratorium. And so I'd like to see us go the inclusionary route, and I'd like to see something along the lines of Councilmember Arndt's suggestion. And I encourage us to keep it in the CBD, and your judgment on whether we include the GB that doesn't include residential now, whatever. But I know that we're going to have lots of conversations about that too. So, and I'll add that our local, state, county, and federal delegations are watching, and we have been able to have a good relationship with them on many different levels, whether it's grants or legislation that we've been able to modify. And I've heard them specifically tell their colleagues that Woodinville is not NIMBY. We're not trying to prevent affordable housing. We're trying to make it make sense to work for us. And so having some moratorium that says no building of any affordable housing while we're moving towards a state requirement makes no sense. And I know that people will be watching, and I think it would have a very negative effect on Woodinville and its relationships on the local, county, state, and federal level. So for all those reasons, I think we should go to the inclusionary route. Councilmember Bess Campbell.
So this is how we go about it is what's important here. Frankly, the federal delegation doesn't live in Woodinville. We do. What concerns me most is how low are we going to go in the interim? Are we going to go too low that we give away a lot and don't get much in return, all because we're not willing to wait for what's coming in the fall? If we're going to do something minimal, okay, fine, let's do something minimal. What matters to me is that we get something down that actually works, that gets some affordability started now. I'm not going to think about what a federal delegation thinks about what we're doing here when we're doing our job. We're taking care of local zoning. That's our job. Their job is to deal with federal, state is their job to deal with state. This is our job. This is our zoning. So I would like to see what our options look like. And a lot of it is going to, unfortunately, be anecdotal. We're not going to have all the data that we need to make the right decision, but we have to do it. And we need to show that we can take control of ourselves because the state is moving in a direction of statewide zoning control. We need to show them, no, we know how to do it on our level. And moratoriums exist for a reason. It is allowed by state. It is not that we're immediately going to get sued for doing it. I think that that's unreasonable. I think what we're looking at are two sides of the same coin here. And how you go about it is the end goal of finding more affordability. So let's get more affordability and let's not cast aspersions and fear and, oh my gosh, what if we don't do it right? What if we don't do it at all? That's my problem. If we just keep kicking the can, this moratorium forced us to have this discussion. I'm happy that we're having this discussion. Let's move forward then. Let's find ways and let's look at zoning that works. 10% of 10 units, perfectly fine. Let's look at the numbers. Let's come up with a good answer that we can be happy with, because I don't want to just give things away to developers. We need to find a way to make this all work for Woodinville, because it is our job to write the code for Woodinville.
Councilmember Evans.
Question, if we do this interim version and we aren't ready with our new zoning by the time it expires, would we be able to extend it knowing what our work plan is?
Yes.
Okay. So I think just as long as we have, because I also agree, I think that we need to do carrots and sticks. So I like the 10% affordability, and then the carrot is the additional affordability for the MFTE program. But knowing that that gives us a 6-month period of time where we're signaling what it is that we're moving towards, gives us a little extra grace period if we don't hit that 6 months. I think it's a really fair way to go. I really don't want to signal to everybody that we don't want development here in Woodinville, but I think this would be a good way to signal that we want development that makes sense for Woodinville and that also provides that affordability that we're looking for.
I'd like to touch on a little bit about working with our partners, and then I want just a brief, I'd like to hear a brief explanation, just a Reader's Digest of the state model, what that looks like. But what I'm going to is that I have talked to our delegation often, and when we have the ability to go to them and say, hey, in our areas, for example, that are on septic and don't have sufficient sidewalks and lighting and sewer systems and stuff, affordable housing doesn't make sense in that instance. And sometimes it doesn't make sense in other residential areas. We have an adopted strategic vision to concentrate growth to meet our GMA targets in the downtown. That's our adopted long time ago strategic vision over many councils. Last time when we were talking about House Bill 1110, we were able to make headway on the fact that we have an unusual situation, especially for a small city that's surrounded by the county. And then when we went back down there in February, when we were talking about this parking amendment, we were able to talk to this delegation and say, hey, this parking is detrimental to a small city that doesn't have sufficient public transportation. We don't have light rail. We don't have sufficient bus routes. And I literally heard one of the senators say, no, Woodinville's not NIMBY. They are they are serious about affordable housing. So saying that we're not going to work with our, or ignore the state, which has the ability come June to say, hey, we're gonna adopt a model ordinance that I promise you Woodinville and this council and nobody in the city will like. That matters. So we have to maintain those relationships. So saying that we're going to not build anything in the city leading up to June when we have to adopt a plan to the state is a terrible idea. And then opening us up to lawsuits for people enjoyment of their property is a terrible idea. So I strongly encourage us to go the other route, which makes a lot of sense. And then that leads me to my question. Can you explain just briefly what the state model ordinance would imply if they were to impose it on Woodinville?
So we're talking about the middle housing provisions. So basically, there's a couple of pieces to it. So I don't know if you recall from some of the previous conversations we had on it, the provisions in the law do a couple of things for middle housing. One, they get rid of the density standards. We can no longer utilize those. The units per acre standard goes away. Instead, what takes its place is a units per lot standard. And so we've kind of worked through in our zoning to figure out what that looks like. And then we have to enable a certain minimum number of types of housing units. So, for example, in this 2-unit configuration, we have to allow like townhouses, duplexes. I can't remember exactly the other terms and stuff, but there's a couple of varieties, courtyard units. Some of them actually kind of overlap with each other and stuff. And so we have to be able to enable those. Because we're a tier 3 city, this is the only reason why we were required to have 2. If we were higher, we would have to allow even more units per lot. So the model ordinance basically puts provisions in place that don't necessarily fit us because it's just a default. In our case, it would be the 2 units. There are these parking standards, which actually we've already incorporated into our parking codes, so we're actually good in those areas. But the problem we're going to have is how do we actually implement these? Based on our current codes? Because there's conflicts with the model ordinance versus our current codes and stuff. So I can give you bullet points if you want to get more specific into the details of the model ordinance and the conflicts and stuff. But the big issue is that we have to get rid of density. We have to go to this units per lot standard, and what that exactly looks like isn't necessarily what we want if we don't have our own ordinances in place in effect before the end of June, which is the deadline.
So essentially it would add density in areas that council has not shown an interest in adding density, or the public hasn't shown interest in adding density.
That's potential. Like I said, I'd have to go back through to get the exact comparison and the difference between the direction that we're trying to go in based on our comp plan versus what the model ordinance has, because I don't have that in front of me right now. And if you want, I can put something together to give you more of an analysis on that. But there are definitely stuff in there that, because it's made to fit over a more broader statewide versus what's specific to a local jurisdiction, it does have things in it that are not things we want to necessarily see.
And that's kind of the point I'm getting to. We have the ability to maintain maintain control of how we build out Woodinville, and we have control of doing that if we don't continue to be good partners and work with our partners. We have the opportunity of having that local control and local knowledge taken away by Olympia, and we saw that with parking. You know, that was just a broad statement of we're going to limit parking to one space on future commercial, one space per 1,000 square feet, which, you know, I'm at Sidekick several times a day. It's a coffee shop. That doesn't even cover the employees. Like there's a 2,200 square foot facility that normally has at least 4 employees, and then there's the customers, and that was disastrous. That would have been awful for Woodinville. So working with the county and state, and yes, our federal our partners matters, and it matters for Woodinville. It matters on what we're going to be able to do, and local control is something we've always advocated for because we're knowledgeable about how Woodinville is. We interact with the public here. Olympia tends to not consider nuances when it comes to cities like Woodinville, and I think we need to avoid that. So, Any other comments? Councilmember Evans.
So I just looked it up, and the model ordinance includes permitted housing types, which would be duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing would be required on all lots zoned predominantly for residential use. The density requirements, there would be no more, mandates a minimum of density of 2 units per lot, with higher densities permitted near major transit stops or when affordable units are included. Development standards, it prohibits imposing standards on middle housing that are more restrictive than those for detached single-family residents. So this includes regulation on building height, setbacks, lot coverage, parking requirements. For design review, it requires that any design review process for middle housing be administrative, streamlining approvals, so there's no design reviews effectively. And parking standards, it limits off-street parking requirements for middle housing to no more than 1 space per unit, which again is problematic for us, and that's why we really need to make sure that we get these in place before the end of June.
Anything else? Feel like you got what we need to possibly move forward May 6th, I think you said?
I think we got quite a bit of input. We can take this back, digest it, and think through some of the nuances and bring back a recommendation for an ordinance at your May 6th along with that public hearing.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, we haven't talked about it, and we can sometimes skip over this because we get in the details. Affordable housing is a crisis here. We need to be a part of that solution, and affordable housing is an economic necessity for Woodinville. We need people to be able, it's a very expensive place to live and work. We need people to be able to live and work here. It's a human need because we need people to have housing, and this area is very expensive for housing. It's a contributor. Expensive housing is a contributor to homelessness, and so we need to be part of this solution. And so I hope we keep that in mind when we have further discussions on this. So thank you. Okay, business item number 8, presentation of 2025 legislative session update. Mr. Hill.
All right. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. My name is Jared Hill, and I'm going to be providing you with a legislative update. The 2025 regular session began on January 13th and ends on April 27th. If all goes well with getting a budget passed, and then if that doesn't happen, a special session may occur, which can be no more than 30 days and is convened by the governor or the legislature following adjournment of the regular session. Our next cutoff date is actually tomorrow, April 2nd. This is the policy committee cutoff for the opposite house. This is the last day to read in committee reports from opposite house, except House Fiscal Committee and Senate Ways and Means and Transportation Committees. But with that being said, there are only 26 days left until sign die, which is exciting. A few updates for you here. I have some excellent news regarding our Move Ahead Washington funds, which was our #1 legislative priority. That is for our trestle project. The project was moved up into the 2025-2027 biennium in the Senate's passed transportation budget, and tomorrow the House version will have a technical amendment included for our project to be included in theirs as well. This is thanks to the strong partnerships with Eastro Partners, who also made this initiative their legislative priority, and their lobbyist was able to communicate the issue to Rep. 5 and get the technical amendment introduced. Once we are listed on both budgets, there's a very high likelihood of the project being included in the final adopted version, which is a huge win for Woodinville and would ensure federal funding is not at risk and deliver this much-needed project on an expedited timeline. I tried to include a screenshot of the project being included in the budget there, but probably just shouldn't have done that because it's very tiny. But it's there, I promise.
Mr. Hill, let me just emphasize that. He's underselling it. That's a huge win. That was our #1 priority, is getting our Move Ahead money moved up into the 25-27 budget. And Jared and Bryn and the rest of the team were successful, it looks like, in doing that. We won't count those chickens yet, but that's a huge win for us. I just wanted to underscore that.
Can you explain exactly what that allows us to do going forward?
Yeah, that will keep us, that plus some of our successes in working, again, thanks to help from some of our federal delegation, have been able to get our permitting approved at the federal level, which some of the strings that come with that federal money, much faster than we had anticipated even at the beginning of this year. So I think, and Asha's probably cringing over next to me, I'm not going to look at her, that we will hopefully be on track to be out to bid for that trestle project by the end of this year, which is huge for us. So this is a part of that puzzle, making sure that we have this money available next year when we're ready to start spending it.
Councilmember Bescam.
The monkey wrench I was reading about in the paper today is the governor. He's a man of very few words and fewer press conferences. He's been very critical of the budgets that have been put forward by both the House and the Senate. He's been less supportive of a lot of infrastructure projects. He's focusing a lot on K-12 and bringing all of the culverts back into alignment. Do we think that we pass his threshold? If we could read the tea leaves from what Bryn has said, from what everyone else has said, do we think that this is a project that is likely to get past his desk?
Yeah, we're under the impression that it is. A lot of the culvert funding got pulled out of the transportation budget, which is a win for this project. You know, it's not done until it's done, so there's a chance that something happens, but given how successful it was on being on both the Senate and the House version, I feel that we're in a good place. If we were only in one of the budgets, I would say there's a stronger chance of volatility in it being pulled, but showing that there's an agreement in both chambers, I think, is a big win for us right now. And then our second legislative priority for the NPRSA Community and Aquatic Center, some updates here for you as well. The NPRSA Community and Aquatic Center Federal Earmark, or CPF, application for $3.5 million has been successfully submitted. We had over 20 letters of support from the project, ranging from multiple cities, such as Redmond, Kenmore, etc., to Eastside Fire and Rescue, as well as a multitude of community organizations. I appreciate the efforts of City Council to continue getting this information out to the community and collecting those letters of support. I think that's a huge win for us, and our federal lobbyist said that we are in a great place, showing a lot of regional buy-in for this project, which is huge because it is a very competitive funding pool. And then in addition to that, we have successfully submitted our King County Parks Levy grant for $5 million. Both grants are requesting funds for the property acquisition portion of the future NPRSA facility. And then this is a little bit different than a usual update here, but since it's not listed explicitly in our legislative agenda, I'm seeking council approval to send a letter of support to President Murray from Cascadia College for their CC5 Gateway building. The City of Woodinville is not seeking any funding for the account that they're seeking funding from, and currently the project is included in the Senate and Governor's budget, but not the House. He's looking to show city support when presenting this information to Rep. Dewar and Kloba. No formal vote is needed, but looking for a general consensus from council that we're comfortable signing on to their letter. And just as I know he presented to council earlier on what this building was, but the building is designed to consolidate student support services into one location and is designed to enhance accessibility and collaboration for students. So there would be an
Councilmember Evans has a question.
Thank you for bringing this forth. We actually have the President's Advisory Council Thursday morning. I know personally, especially since there is no conflict with what we want to the buckets that we're trying to get funding from, I think that this is a really important project for Cascadia, for that entire campus. And it's part of our community. I mean, yes, it is in Bothell, but it's literally just over the hill. And there's a lot of people in Woodinville who really benefit from this place. So I would be in favor of giving a letter of support for the House. I know how much that means to us when our partners and regional partners come to the table with a letter of support. And so I would be in support of this.
Councilmember Bescam.
Not that it matters in terms of supporting this, because who doesn't support college kids? But how much are they asking for from the state?
You know, I should have included that in my presentation. If you give me 1 second, I can tell you. Yeah.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yeah, I also support this. UW Bothell and Cascadia, that campus there provides kids, students, adults in our community the opportunity to receive a world-class education right here in our own community. And I think doing what we can to support their growth, reasonably of course, as well, really benefits the community here and creates a long-term growth for our city in terms of being able to provide educational opportunities for those who seek it and want to continue to live in the Woodinville area. So I support this as well.
I also support it. I think that if we had just adopted our legislative agenda to say education instead of just K through 12, we wouldn't be even having this discussion. We could just go ahead and do it, but certainly need a clarification. But I agree with Councilmember Evans. This is a wonderful regional resource, and we have lots of Woodinville residents and their children that are taking advantage of this, and I think it's a wonderful program. I think we should support it. And again, I just want to emphasize, first I want to thank staff and everybody that worked on our legislative agenda, because getting in the position we are with $5 million out of the state with the state budget in the condition that it's in was an achievement. And that goes to having the relationships that we were talking about earlier. It matters. And it matters at the federal, state, county level. And at some point, I'm assuming we're going to talk about the transfer station. Having those relationships at the county level certainly paid off for Woodinville, where the transfer station is going to remain and be improved in Kirkland and not be sited in Woodinville in our tourist district near Chateau Saint Michel. So having these relationships, and Jared, you're a big part of that, and staff, we worked really hard to establish these relationships. Not only have we had strategic and legislative victories on preventing things that would be harmful to Woodinville, but we've also had victories on obtaining over in the last, 2.5 years, almost $24 million plus for infrastructure for the city. That a lot of this stuff we wouldn't be able to do for a city our size if we weren't able to obtain a lot of these grants. And in the instance of move ahead, we're able to start on our bridge, our essential bridge project, which is going to add 2 lanes and a safe way for people to cross over the state route there to 131st and add a much better aesthetic welcome to Woodinville. So again, everybody that worked on this, deserves congratulations, particularly our legislative priorities, as well as the transfer station. That was a 3-year effort on making the case that took a lot of energy and resources and political capital to state the case. In fact, I had 2 people high up in the county tell me that if we hadn't opposed early, and if we hadn't included the community in a petition showing that the community 2,000 plus signatures was against the transfer station, it could have possibly went here because there was political pressure on to send it here. So I just wanted to thank you and point that out and really emphasize that these relationships matter and they're paying off for Woodinville and all the hard work that staff's been doing.
To answer the question, I believe, don't quote me on it, but I believe it's $27.5 million is the request.
$27.5 million? Yep. Wow. Okay.
College buildings aren't cheap.
Oh, I know. Yeah, tuition. Any more questions? Are you still going, Jared?
Yes, yeah, sorry, I wasn't
Thank
sure
you.
if there was more
Yep.
on this. Great, and then some more information here. Less and less to report on with individual bills as we get closer to the end of legislative session, but I do have a few updates for you. First off being HB 1217, which is the tenant protections and rent stabilization bill. This bill continues to progress and has been scheduled for a hearing on April 4th in the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, and that's at 1:30 p.m. We're monitoring the advancement to ensure compliance with our local ordinance 755, which goes into effect right around the corner on April 12th. And then just as a FYI, if you hear anything from your constituents, a web page has been established with the model of the required notice of tenant rights, and it's available on the website. That's under Home, and then you go to I Want To, Learn About, and Tenant Rights, and there's all sorts of information there about our local ordinance as well. Then in addition to that, the condo liability bill, the first one being HB 1403, continues to progress as well. On March 26th, it passed out of the Senate Committee on Housing, and then on the 27th, it was passed to the Rules Committee for a second reading. In the same vein, HB 1516, which also seeks to address condo liability, passed the Senate Committee on Business, Financial Services, and Trade on March 26th, and on the 27th, it was passed to the Rules Committee for a second reading. Both of those seem to be progressing well and have no reason to believe they don't make it across the finish line. And I apologize, I just realized the title of this slide is March 18th, but that is supposed to be March 31st. So finally, HB 1183 is a bill we mentioned at your last meeting concerning building codes and development regulations in regards to retrofitting existing buildings into housing. We do not foresee any projects in Woodinville at this moment that fall into that bucket, but are weary that a component of this bill includes not allowing for additional parking to be required in developments that are being retrofitted into existing spaces. And for example, if a warehouse with 15 employee parking spaces was converted to 50 housing units, the city would not be allowed to require more than the existing 15 stalls. Not an ideal bill in terms of maintaining local control, but certainly not one that is as pressing as the impacts from SB 5184, which we were successfully carved out of. And that concludes my update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Hill? Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you.
Strong work. And again, thanks to staff and everybody that's worked on that. I sent out thank yous on the condo liability to the people I know is working on it. And that's Representative Taylor, Dewar, and Senator Shoemake. I know that they've been working hard on that. So I sent out, I think that's a big benefit in the long run for Woodinville. Councilmember Bess Campbell.
Just a word of caution. I was reading in the Seattle Times, there was an article about local zoning control and how the state has, I think it was Bateman from Olympia, was incredibly hostile towards local zoning control. And her perspective was that we can't have it anymore. And that seems to be gaining a lot of traction. We're doing everything we can, and we're working within the parameters that they give us. Their parameters don't always align. They seem to be in metric, and we're in imperial. But I think we're past the point where just saying local control matters is going to be enough when we lobby now. Now I think it has to be a different angle, because I do think that Olympia is a little tired of how slow it is for us to take their regulations in. So either we need to really inform Olympia that we are not the same as Wenatchee, we are not the same as Seattle, we are not the same as Vancouver. We just can't have one size fits all. But I think we have to change our tactic, because when we say local zoning control, they translate in their minds to NIMBY. So that could be something we talk to with our lobbyists, but I do think that's something that we need to adjust, because I think it's coming.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and one that I feel like we did chip away a little bit this session, but in the future could definitely be better, is highlighting all the growth that is happening in Woodinville, and maybe a perception that people have from Woodinville when they visited 10, 15 years ago and there's no new development isn't necessarily the case now, and that NIMBYism is really not what maybe it used to be, or it's not the current situation. So I think we need to continue to highlight that, and excited to do so.
Councilmember Edwards.
Thank you. Just one other topic that has been coming up from constituents that I want to bring up that I think will be important for us to follow also is seeing how the bills go in terms of property tax reform, and if that is passed, being able to educate our community on how property tax works and the distribution of that, because I know that's one, especially people on fixed income are really worried about right now. So being able to, that does get passed, educate on how property tax work and how that will impact them potentially.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And that a lot of the property tax bills have been being pushed pretty heavily by AWC, and I'm sure they're going to put out information for cities to decide if they want to take it on councilmanically. So if that time comes, I'm sure we could definitely get some of that information out to the community.
You may not have been around long enough for Mr. Fritz's presentation. I'm sure he'll be very excited to go through the PowerPoint presentation, and it's got animations and everything about how property tax works. So we're already ready to go for that one when that time comes. Yep.
So when we were down in Olympia, and we talked about this parking issue, we emphasized with our delegation, and we went to the 45th and the 48th, and we talked to many people about this isn't a NIMBYism thing. We have we started with, we don't think that this bill, which started off saying one size fits all isn't a good solution, then it proposed a one size fits all solution, which we said that doesn't make sense. And we said that, we don't think that this bill should pass, and we got a sense that this bill was going to pass in some form. So then we pivoted strategically in discussions with our partners, and our city manager and our lobbyists, and we pivoted to, well, how about you frame it around areas that are on light rail and have significant public transportation? Because we're not anywhere near getting light rail. We don't have sufficient public transportation. That didn't get any legs. And I'm not behind the scenes, and I don't know why, but it didn't. Then we pivoted to frame it around areas that have significant tourism that need the parking. So we tried, and that got a little traction, but in discussions somewhere died. So then I actually suggested to the city manager, I said, well, what about population? Because we got the amendment for House Bill 1110 on population. And the city manager said, well, that's not a good metric. And I said, yeah, I agree. However, and we had Senator Stanford and Senator Dingra went to bat for us on the population amendment. And, we have highlighted that this is a NIMBY thing, and actually Senator Dingra rightfully said, I come to Woodinville with my girlfriends to go wine tasting. And we highlighted that they're not coming by bus, they need a place to park. And so that resonated. So having these relationships and highlighting that, and it kind of, I bristled at the comments a little bit where there was jokes, it was tongue-in-cheek, but it got called the country club carve-out. And I thought, well, that's not what we're talking about or whatever. So there is something that we do need to emphasize on that. And so I agree, and I also disagree that we actually are working with our relationships to fight that NIMBYism thing. And it happened with the park and ride. We made a case, or not the park and ride, but the transfer station. We made the case that this is a NIMBY thing. This is for economic, environmental, logistical, legal, community, all kinds of reasons why wasn't an appropriate site in Woodinville, and we were successful. So again, thanks for the work, but I want everybody to know that we're all working really hard to build those relationships and take advantage of those relationships. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Business item number 9, we're going to have a closed session to discuss collective bargaining per RCW 42.3.1404A. And council will adjourn to a closed session for approximately 30 minutes pursuant to 42.30 RCW, which exempts from the Open Public Meetings Act that portion of a meeting for collective bargaining sessions with employee organizations, including contract negotiations, grievance meetings, and discussions relating to the interpretation or application of labor agreement, RCW 42.30.1404A. No formal action expected to be taken. We will, can we take 2 minutes and then we'll meet? Okay, we're back in session. No action taken. Next will be public comments. Anybody sign up? Nobody sign up? Report city manager.
I've got it here somewhere. My only item this evening, and I'll have to find the details, but I can report, and I know we'll discuss this at some point, that we do have tentatively our new domain name reserved, and we were able to get Woodinville.gov. So if, in case you've been following this, other than outside of the major metropolitan entities, typically those domains have been assigned. For example, WoodinvilleWA.gov, that the state abbreviation is always in there. We're just so special, we got Woodinville.gov. So we'll be working on that. That'll take a little bit of time to transition. It'll take some effort, but we're working on that, and so that's in progress. I know that was an important piece for many of you, so we're working on it.
Thank you. Reports to council members. Councilmember Evans.
Yes, that's very important to me, so that's excellent news. Thank you. Just one quick thing. I mentioned it earlier, but I have the President's Advisory Council at Cascadia Community College on Thursday, so if anybody has anything they want me to pass along, that would be great, and I'm looking forward to letting them know that we'll be supporting them in that ask, although they'll probably know by then because the letter's probably due tomorrow. So, thank you.
Councilmember Edwards.
No report, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Randolph.
The city manager took away my only complaint for tonight, so nothing else, thank you.
Councilmember Bess Campbell.
There was one question I had from the public. There was a for sale sign in the Yoda Grove Park a couple days ago. Now I know that there's the slice that we have, there's the slice that's wetland, and then there's that other slice that's not buildable. There was panic from the public about what they're doing with it. I remember we've had this conversation before. I think that the for sale price was something like $1. So there was something going on there, but there was a lot of consternation in the community about it's being sold. Why is the city digging up the park? So if you could enumerate on why we're not digging up the park, that would be great.
You're exactly correct on it. So the city doesn't own all of that. The city owns the piece right along. I don't have the street name off the top of my head. We own a piece of it that is probably what most of the public sees and accesses. Then there's a privately owned piece behind it, and that's what is for sale. I'd heard that from the realtor. I had a call from the realtor here recently. You're exactly correct. That for years has been an effort. The property owner, if I last recall, wanted a bunch of money for it. It's worth exactly nothing, and still trying to sell it. The development on it would be extremely limited. So the city's not selling its property. This is the private property owner who's continuing to try to sell their property.
Perfect. And then we all did a little loud cheers for the multi-year process with the NERTs. And I wanted to thank the community who went to all of the meetings. So there was meetings in Kirkland, there were meetings here. They're not the most exciting meetings, but I really enjoyed seeing the community come out. And of the thousands of comments that were added to the EIS, I would imagine that most of them came from Woodinville. So it truly was a group effort. And we just have a lot of really smart and caring people in the city. And I'm glad that everybody came out and did their part. And we all help each other. I guess that's how it works. And people want to get involved. And what better way to get involved than to keep a transfer station out of our little slice of heaven?
Councilmember Arndt.
Thank you. Two things from previous meetings in the last few weeks. Last week at the Public Spaces meeting, we had a report from city staff, or the Public Spaces Commission had a report from city staff on some of the alternatives they're trying in an effort to eliminate the use of Roundup in the city. So I was just really heartened to hear that staff is working on that. And I was really excited that one of the alternatives includes allowing some goats to roam around in the park. And I'm still waiting to hear on what day they're going to be out there, so I can be out there to witness that action. I don't think they want to tell us. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that at the North King County Coalition on Homelessness, we had a report from KCRHA, and the new point-in-time count numbers have been released, and the last year saw a 23% increase in unsheltered homelessness in King County. Now, I bring this up because it's shocking, and also as we have our conversations about adding housing, and affordability and all these things. I think it's really just lighting a fire and putting an underline and an exclamation point on why we're doing this, because to borrow the title from Greg Colburn's book, homelessness is a housing problem. So I just put that out for community to understand why we're pushing so hard to build housing and add affordability in the city.
Councilmember Taylor.
Nothing for tonight.
I'd just like to add, and Councilmember Arndt, probably too modest to mention this, but I wanted to add congratulations. She's now the chair in PRSA. That board thought highly enough of her and her work to elect her to the chair, which I think is fantastic, and we look forward to working with MPRSA going forward. I had a question on where we're at. I had a couple people ask me about adding some lights at certain crosswalks around the city. I know that's a challenge, so I communicated with them if in the interim that we could, until we find a better solution longer term, if we could do those flag buckets. So I would like to see us where we don't have lights at chosen intersections, where we add those flag buckets, which I think is a safety issue that's probably pretty inexpensive, and adds some visibility. So I'd like to see us look at that, or what that, in significant intersections or crosswalks, I'd like to see the lights where it's appropriate mid-street, and where we can't add the flag buckets. So something we could discuss in the future. And that's it. We're going to adjourn for another executive session. Council will adjourn to a closed session for approximately 60 minutes for the city manager's annual performance review. RCW 42.30.1101G. Formal action may be taken. And 60 minutes, so let's adjourn until 9:30. Council's back in session. At this point in time, I'd like to pass the gavel. I have a motion to make.
Mayor Millman.
After we've done our evaluation of, I'm sorry, I'll make my motion, then I'll speak to it. So my motion is that we keep the city manager's compensation at the current rate until we get a chance to evaluate again. I would like to add the severance to 12 months from 9 months. And I would like to add, after city elections, there is a cooling off period, which is a new trend in city managers, of 6 months where he can only be fired for cause. And that's my motion.
Second.
Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, any discussion?
Yeah. So I asked Mr. Fritz for some data heading into this meeting, and to address the first item, compensation. So the comparables show that our city manager is compensated at $243,000 per year. The median is $235,000. And so I think that is a fair compensation where we're at. I think he's doing a great job, but I think based on the comparables, I think it behooves us to keep that salary at that level and then reevaluate when we do this again next year. And then the severance, the trends are the more senior city managers have severance of 12 months. Covington, for example, city manager number 10 years, 12-month severance. Kenmore, 13 years, 12 months severance. And then the less seniors are somewhere between 6 and 9 months. And then to address the third point, the cooling off period, as I said, that's a new trend, and that allows a city manager after a city election to work with whatever constitutes the majority of the new council and work with them and have a period where he gets to address whatever the issues may be following, which sometimes is a contentious election. So that's my recommendation. I think the city manager is doing a fantastic job. Last year, for example, I thought that one of the highlights I thought was when we were discussing the harvest project, and we had discussions on the property over there, and he was saying that I think I can get property over there for the city. I frankly, for 2 months, I laughed at him because I thought that was going to be impossible. He wound up getting not only a property that we have the ability to do parking or whatever we see fit with for free. We also got $300,000 for affordable housing, which is one of our priority projects, which I didn't think was going to even be possible. So we turned the harvest project, we didn't have a whole lot of public benefits, into some public benefits. So I think that alone and many of the other things that the staff is contributing to, and we had most recently the transfer station. We had the $5 million grant. We avoided a parking problem that would have been huge, and I think he and staff are really knocking out of the park. So.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Bess Campbell.
For reasons that I enumerated in my performance review, which I won't go into here, there are some concerns I have with day-to-day operations and transparency with the public. So again, I don't want to get into anything here as a part of this performance review. I don't think that I can support a 12-month severance at this point. I think it's there's been a troubling trend in the way that the city manager operates that is now 2 points is a line. It's a trend, and I find it very troubling, and mostly I find it troubling for the community that we are all supposed to be representing, so I'm a no on this.
Any other discussion? Councilmember Taylor.
Yeah, the first time we heard about a 6-month cool-off period was tonight, and I'm not sure that that's an industry trend. I think that would go along with when we take a look at benefits and analysis there, because I don't see hamstringing a elected council, and that's what it is. It's more talking about the future election in November and hamstringing their leadership for 6 months, more or less. I don't see why we have to do that. He's doing a good job, has a good performance record. Let's let it stand with that. And, without adding something that I've never heard of. And, it might be out there, but I don't know how prevalent that is and why it's there. So I can't support that.
All right, I'd like to speak to that a little bit, largely because I can understand the value of going through a 6-month cooling down period. There are a couple of things at play there. Number one, newly elected officials and an existing city manager, there needs to be some level of continuation. 6 months is not a long time in a 4-year term. And if you have newly elected officials, it's going to be difficult for those newly elected officials to actually make a decision based on the city manager from actually being in that job, especially if they don't have any actual experience dealing with that city manager. And I think that's where that new piece is coming from. It may be also be coming from what's happening right now at a federal level, where there are newly employed people who are being dismissed, and there's not a lot of conversation about how things are supposed to work over a longer term. So I think it makes sense to add this 6-month period. I don't think it's very detrimental, especially in terms of people that just want to, work with the city manager to move things forward for the city. And if you don't, there's nothing stopping you if there's a cause. It's firing within 6 months unless there's cause. So there's still a cause there. There's no reason that this would block still dismissing a city manager for not doing his job. Any other discussion? Mayor Millman.
This is a non-cost item for compensation, so my proposal is to keep compensation flat, the 6 months, and the severance doesn't cost the city anything. Those are just words in the contract. And to reiterate what the deputy mayor said, I think it makes sense to, we have a division on the council. I mean, there's no getting around it, but the city manager, by definition, follows what the majority of council wants to do. And the 2 council members here speaking against this were on the other side of that math when I first got on council, and the 2 that were often in the minority there, the city manager followed that majority at the time, and that's just the way it works. I think city manager is I get emails and calls from several cities. I can think of 4 off the top of my head where they're wanting to know how is Woodinville getting so much done for a city our size, and I attribute a lot of that to the city manager and staff. So I push back on a little bit of that because I don't think it's exactly accurate, and I've expressed my opinion on that. But I think this is a non-cost item, and I think it's something that we should do.
Any other discussion? All right, Madam Clerk, I'd like to take a roll call vote.
Thank you.
Councilmember Evans?
Yes.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Bess Campbell?
No.
Mayor Millman?
Yes.
Councilmember Arndt?
Yes.
Councilmember Taylor?
No.
Deputy Mayor Randolph?
Yes, it passes 5-2. no other items are on the...
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you. Any second?